And welcome and happy to be here this evening. Those of you that are here in person and also those that are watching online. I made a very few little cards that tell us about the McCauley lectures that have been scheduled so far. And they may change a little bit, but they're over on the table. So if some of you'd like to have something to look at versus just checking the website or whatever, you can look at those. And there's a couple on there that no one knows about. They haven't been scheduled for very long, but so they're surprises. Next month, we're having a lecture on the Hagerstown Fair by Raymond Holton, and then we'll have a couple months off for summer break and then start again. We usually start again in October, but I did schedule a special lecture for the 160th anniversary of Antietam in September. So that one is mentioned on the card. I hope you read about Jean Woods, her interests and accomplishments, but just in case you didn't, she was the director of the Washington County Museum of Fine Arts for 21 years. During that time, she organized and curated the Germanic Heritage Exhibition, marking the 300th anniversary of Germanic immigration to Pennsylvania. She also curated exhibits on rock tour. She just taught me to say that. How did I do? Because if you look it up online, there's other ways to say it. And the Cumberland Valley Pottery. Before retiring, she also spent 14 years doing art consulting for museums and private collections. Rock tour is a favorite research topic for her, and last month she had an article published in Maine Antique Digest on a Lancaster County rock tour, and I just made a copy of it, so we'll have that in the Western Maryland room. Jean has been a friend of the Western Maryland room for many, many years, and we're really thankful because she also has donated valuable materials to us. In fact, if you go to the library catalog, along with all the books and DVDs that you can find there, there's a Jean Woods collection, archival collection listed, because we've entered that into our collection management database. And one book she gave us is called the Reverend Victor Miller's book, and it has a lot of, he was Lutheran minister in Leitersburg, and there are a lot of names in there, and we have digitized most of that book. It has a lot of other valuable information, and we'd like to have it transcribed now, so if there are any transcription volunteers, you can talk to us about it, because we'd love to get all that information so that it's more accessible. So, without anything else, I'll let Jean talk to us this evening. Thank you for coming.
Thank you, Elizabeth. It's a pleasure to be here at Washington County Free Library. And I know from looking at the audience and talking to some of you, many of you have Pennsylvania German background in your ancestry. And that is most appropriate considering that by 1756, this part of Maryland and Pennsylvania were predominantly Germanic in their heritage. The Pennsylvania Germans gave us a unique American folk art. Their bold designs and bright colors were something that decorated literally everything in their household. Penn, as you know, was given the land of Pennsylvania by Charles II, and he went right to work. In 1671, he visited the northern European provinces, telling them about the land that they could acquire in Pennsylvania, that it was inexpensive and very fertile. He left off that you had to clear all this land. They were very surprised to find all the forested areas in the country. They came from the German provinces, particularly Baden-Württemberg and the Palatinate, which you see here in gray on the map. From northern France, many Alsatians came, who were Huguenot or Calvinist in denomination. From Switzerland, the cantons of Zurich and of Bern, many German Reformed and also Mennonites from that area. The Moravians came from Moravia in the current Czech Republic, and the Schwenkfelders, which we really don't have here in Maryland, came from Silesia in present-day Poland. They quickly built their houses, their mills, their schools, and their churches. At the upper right, you see the Hans Herr House, built in 1719 by Christian Herr in the Peckway region of Lancaster County. You can tour this house today. Note the central chimney and the steep pitch of the roof, both Germanic traits of architecture, very similar to the Hager House in City Park. We also have Schifferstadt at the upper left in Frederick. It was built by Joseph Brunner in 1759. Again, the central chimney. And when they restored this house, it had the 5-plate stove actually intact in the building, which is how the Pennsylvania Germans heated their houses, not by fireplace only. The house in the middle is one of many built by the Funk family that are scattered around Hagerstown. This one is Rockland on the northern edge of Hagerstown, built by Henry Funk Jr. in 1773. His father, Henry Funk, came from Virginia in the 1740s and speculated in land in this area. On the Callis contractor property, there is a stone building that his father built that's still intact. His first cousin built a house in Funkstown, Jacob Funk. That house has a 1760 date stone and stands on the main street. And of course, the town was named for him. In the lower left, we have mills, as many of these people were artisans. They were weavers and blacksmiths. The mill was built by Jacob Kine in 1741 in Ephrata. He was a householder of the Ephrata cloister, which was a monastic society of the Seventh-day German Baptist Brethren, started in the 1730s. It is known today for its printing, music, and Shrift. And you all know the bank barn with freestanding forebay that you see in the bottom right, this one up near Holsfield. These Schweitzer barns literally dot our countryside. They quickly cleared the land, and their fertile farming techniques led to great progress in the American colonies. You see an Amish farmer in the Big Valley using a reaper, which is the type of harvesting equipment all our ancestors would have used in the 19th century. They built their log houses and furnished them, and they quickly became important in terms of metalwork. They were involved in all phases of the iron industry. In Washington County, Green Spring Furnace, west of Hagerstown near Fort Frederick, was one of the early furnaces established by Lancelot Jakes, who was a Huguenot immigrant to Maryland. You see the jam stove in the middle, this one from 1766, decorated with tulips and other motifs from Marianne Furnace in Berks County. Fanciful weather vanes, copper apple butter kettles, hinges for doors and hardware. Very unusual, fanciful scrolled hinges were a hallmark of the Pennsylvania German blacksmiths. The beakers are pewter, made by Johann Christopher Heine, a Lancaster County pewterer. They are in use in the Codorus Church of the Brethren, which is on the line between York and Carroll counties. They decorated all kinds of metalwork. You see the punch decorated brass spatula. Below it, a copper tea kettle, the ubiquitous kettle in the kitchen. This one made by Samuel Gorgas, who was a coppersmith in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And he is actually part of the famous clock-making Gorgas family. The chalice is another pewter chalice by Johann Christopher Heine that I mentioned before, and you see his hallmark on it. Zion Reformed Church here in Hagerstown has a wonderful pewter salver. It's part of their collection and was made by William Will of Philadelphia. Rifles were invented by the Pennsylvania Germans, the Pennsylvania rifle. And this is one by Henry Lecture, who worked in Carlisle from the late 18th century up until the 1840s. Lecture was actually appointed by John Armstrong Jr., who was the Secretary of War under James Madison. And he became the superintendent of the Springfield Arsenal during the War of 1812. When he was working in Carlisle, there were 15 other gunsmith shops in the town. Lecture is important to us as he is the father of William D. Lecture, who was the artist and dentist in Smithsburg, Maryland. You can see Lecture portraits at the Miller House here in town, and many of them are retained by the families for whom they were made. And again, you see the barrel stamped with his die stamp. You have to remember that these were bespoke pieces. Gunsmiths could not always do the engraving, make the locks, do the barrel forging. Sometimes these were farmed out to specialized craftsmen. Other gunsmiths that are very famous and much earlier include Jacob Dickert of Lancaster, Pennsylvania, a Moravian gunsmith who made a number of rifles for the colonial troops. He had many apprentices, some of whom came to this area. The rifle below with the engraved hatch box is by Jacob Fareed, part of a gunsmithing family in Lancaster County, who were also Huguenot in origin. The patriarch of Washington County gunsmiths is certainly Christian Hawken, who worked in Sharpsburg. He and his brother Nicholas worked here before the Revolution, making long rifles such as this one, and 15 members of their family became gunsmiths. Two of Christian's sons, Samuel and Jacob, went to St. Louis, Missouri, and they made the prairie rifles that won the American West, that were used by the likes of Kit Carson. Besides the Hawken family, we have the Stonecipher family in Boonesboro. We have the Marker family, and you see Daniel Marker's relief carved rifle at the upper top. And he and two of his brothers worked in the Sharpsburg area. And below it, you see a cheek piece on a rifle by the York gunsmith Jacob Sell, made after the Revolution. It is a starburst and it says, United States, we are one. And depending on your ability to pay, you could have a nicely engraved patch box, you could have all kinds of inlay, such as silver or ivory placed in your rifle, or a fancy cheek piece like this one. But of course, it remained the province because it's a bespoke piece that you would have to pay for. So these were not inexpensive rifles. Furniture. What you look for in Pennsylvania furniture is decoration. On the bottom left, you see a panel door. In the corners, it has fleur-de-lis carving. And in the middle, it has a Celtic knot of sulfur inlay. The Pennsylvania German cabinet makers invented the sulfur inlay technique in Lancaster County. And it was molten and poured into the furniture and then filed down. There is sulfur inlay furniture made in Maryland and also down through the Valley of Virginia. Wherever they traveled, and of course they came through this area in great masses down the Great Wagon Road from Philadelphia to Lancaster to Winchester to Roanoke, on to Winston-Salem, Charlotte, the Dutch Forks area of South Carolina, and eventually to Augusta, Georgia. At the upper top, we have a case piece with detail, the beautiful frieze with Greek key design and applied flowers. This is a piece that was made here in this area. On a blanket chest, we had paint decoration, bright colors, beautiful flowers, geometric motifs. And on the right, we see a clock made after the Revolution with the American eagle and lots of inlay. The case is literally inlaid. It was made by John Paul in Lebanon County around 1810, and is part of the Winterthur Museum collection. One of the most famous clockmakers is John George Hoff Sr. 4 of his sons would follow him in the business. You see his portrait by Jacob Eichholz, a Pennsylvania German coppersmith and artist of Lancaster. Hoff was trained by his father-in-law in Germany. He came to Pennsylvania and a year and a half later made this clock. The clock is really a very interesting piece. He made it for Daniel Basor and his wife Catherine. Prior to the Revolution, they moved from Lancaster County to Franklin County, Pennsylvania, and their stone house still stands south of Zollinger. This clock is really important for the case, however. The cabinet maker was a master of inlay work. You see the bold strap inlay, which is indicative of Pennsylvania German work, but it's surrounded by pewter stringing, which you can see best in the starburst. The pewter stringing also surrounds the date 1768 at the top of the sarcophagus put on the clock. This particular clock remained here in this area until 1998 when it was sold out of the family at Horst Auction in Lancaster. It brought $119,000. Fortunately, it was purchased by Richard Dietrich of the Dietrich American Foundation. So it is now on loan to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. You can see it there today. There are 2 other cases by the same maker. We don't know his name. One was in the late Bill DuPont's collection. It's now owned by his daughter Sabrina. It was made for Peter Ferree in 1765 and dated. The clockmaker was Rudy Stoner, who was a contemporary of Hoff. The third clock, by the way, that one actually sold for $47,000 back in the early 80s. The third clock sold in 2015. Also a very interesting case with pewter stringing around the inlay. It sold at Pook and Pook auction in 2015 for $152,000. It was purchased by the Chipstone Foundation in Fox Point, Wisconsin. When I was at Chipstone, I was able to handle this clock, pull off one of the finials. The plinths actually have pewter stringing in them, and you could really see how this cabinet maker made the construction on these cases for the clocks. Another famous clockmaker is certainly John Fisher of York. John Fisher came with his parents to this country and he was orphaned at age 13. This did not hold him back. He literally was a mechanical genius. He made musical clocks, astronomical clocks, and a 35-day clock, which is in the collection of the Yale University. This is one of his clocks in the York History Center. It has the metal dowel brass spandrels in the hood. It has very interesting inlay in the case. And we have to remember that Fisher could make his own cases. He was a cabinet maker, he was an artist, he was a carver and an engraver. This one has a dog train, a raccoon, or some kind of animal up a tree. And the bottom part, which has an oval cartouche, has a deer on it. You could have various clocks made. Again, it depended on what you could afford. You might only have a 30-hour clock if you were not wealthy, and it would be in a very plain case. Otherwise, you might have an 8-day weight-driven clock like this one. You can see a lot of Fisher clocks at the York History Center, including one of his musical clocks. After the Revolution, we have this clock by Christian Evie. Note the spread wing eagle in the pediment of this clock and also the floral decoration. It is a clock that is made of cherry. It's over 9 feet tall. And it shows the musical bells, how they were inserted by the clockmaker in the movement of the clock. It plays 10 tunes. Evie was a very prolific clockmaker. He made wonderful clocks, and the cases are very interesting as well. There's one of his in the DAR Museum in Washington, D.C., and he was followed by a son, Jacob, who was also a clockmaker. In this area, we have a lot of wonderful clockmakers. You all know George Waltz and other clockmakers like Martha Johnson and John Reynolds. But the one in the middle was made by Jacob Young. It is a metal dial done before the Revolution, and as you can see, it's engraved with the name Elizabethtown, which was, of course, the name of Hagerstown, named for his Jonathan Hager's wife, Elizabeth Kirshner. On the right is a clock by Jacob Meyer in the Frederick History Center. This particular clock, whoever made the case, got his ideas for the pagoda top from the British design books of the period. We don't know who he is, but certainly he was familiar with the latest in design techniques. A much later clockmaker in Hagerstown was Henry Gershon, who worked in the 19th century, and he is actually buried at Rose Hill Cemetery. This particular clock is in a private collection in New Jersey. The luxury good in your household would be the Kleiderschrank or wardrobe. The one on the left is literally covered with sulfur inlay, vine and flower inlay. In the door panels, you have, again, the Florida bees carved in the corners and bird and crown motif, geometric patterns at the bottom. It was made for the Hoover family in 1779. The shrunk on the right, however, was made 11 years earlier in 1768. It too is a sulfur inlaid. It has the name of the owner, David Newlaw, and his wife, Anna Kaufman. It is in the collection of the Mennonite Historical Society in Lancaster, and perhaps the plainer case is more practical for a Mennonite farmer in Hemphill Township, Lancaster County. He was actually the ancestor of the Moomaw family, who came to Sharpsburg in the 1790s. And I think most of you are familiar with the Moomaw farm and cemetery on the Antietam battlefield. Going on in the province of the woman of the household, you would have the kitchen dresser. Much later, these were called Dutch cupboards because of the little pie shelf and because so many were made for Pennsylvania German families. They were designed to show the ceramics, the gaudy German, Welsh and the spatterware type of ceramics that you see here. They were made in Staffordshire, England, particularly for the Pennsylvania German market. The blanket chest was certainly the ubiquitous type of storage that you would have in your household. The one at the bottom was made by John Flory in Lancaster County. Florey made a series of over 20 of these blanket chests that we know of today, but obviously there are many others. This one was made for his neighbor, Henry Ober, who was a prosperous blacksmith. It was made for his son, Jacob. Across the top it says, "This chest belongs to Jacob Ober, 1794. It's decorated with unicorns, birds, and flowers." He also made one for Jacob's sister, Veronica, also the same year. That particular chest is in Claverton Manor, the American Museum in Bath, England, and I was able to examine it a number of years ago when I was in England. Florey had descendants who came here to Smithsburg, Maryland, and many of them became stonemasons around the Smithsburg area. The one at the upper left is for Elizabeth Hollinger. It was made in this region. You see the 3 arches with tulip decoration. Of course, if it had 3 drawers across the bottom, it's going to be more expensive than your plain board chest. This one remained in the family till the 1940s when it was sold out of the family at public auction, actually near the Masters. The one at the upper right, there are many of these in this area. They were made somewhere between Smithsburg and Leitersburg. They are painted chests. If they have the drawers, they have the fan decoration in the corners. And they always have a little banner across the front, which has the name or the initials of the owner, as well as the date, which you can see clearly at the one on the bottom, which has the name D. Shank, 1810, February 6, 1810, and the little tulip decoration. Other ones include chests decorated by Johannes Spittler. Spittler worked in Shenandoah County, Virginia, in what today is now Page County. He decorated clock cases and other types of furniture. The one at the bottom is in the Colonial Williamsburg collection. The one at the upper left was sold by Jeff Evans in 2015 down near Harrisonburg for $356,000. Jeff Evans sold another one this January for $77,000. And in 2019, Hurley Auction in Wayne Castle sold one that came out of the home in Boonesboro for $41,000. A month later, Collins in Cincinnati sold one for $43,000. It gives you an idea of what paint decoration can do for a pine chest. Another group of furniture is the Tonga furniture, brightly painted. This is a very unusual piece in the Diedrich American collection for Peter Brown, and the decoration has a hunter and dog scene on the front. You can clearly see how it was done. The background is dark green with red speckled dashes throughout the chest, on the top, on the sides, throughout. And there's another one of these made for Peter's brother, Michael, decorated in much the same manner. All kinds of boxes for trinkets, candles, documents were in use in the household. The one at the upper right was for Anna Weiser. It's highly inlaid, different types of wood, and she was the daughter of Conrad Weiser, the famous Indian scout. The one in the middle was made for William Funk in 1795 by John Driscoll, a Quaker cabinet maker in Bucks County. Slide-lid box with chip decoration on the edges. Upper left, Heinrich Bucher, who did beautiful floral boxes in the 19th century in Berks County. And at the lower right, you see a Jonas Weber box. And many of these boxes are coming on the market. They are brightly painted. They have buildings on the front and sometimes on the sides. These are actually pretty small. They're about this big. One sold a few years ago for $43,000, and one sold earlier this year in January for over $19,000. The box at the lower left is done by the man we call the checkerboard artist. He worked in Somerset County, Pennsylvania. We have no idea of his name, but he did a lot of boxes, very different types of boxes, but all decorated with a checkerboard pattern. A toolbox by him sold last year for $81,000. Corner cupboards. You're looking at the blue corner cupboard where we saw the detail earlier. Of course, the blue decoration, that's very important because not too many things were decorated in blue. The pigment was quite expensive at the time period. And again, you see the applied flowers, the Greek key pattern on the frieze. On the right, you see an exuberant paint decorated corner cupboard. And these are the things you look for when you're buying furniture, original paint. I think I missed one here. You're looking at a desk and bookcase. This would have been for the man of the household to do his work, store his books. The one on the left is in the Lancaster History Center. The pediment is highly carved. This is not applied carving, it's carved from the solid. In Philadelphia, these types of case pieces would have had applied carving. And it goes to show you the sophistication of cabinet makers here in the back country. The one on the right was by Conrad Dahl of Frederick, Maryland. This one is in the collection of the Museum of Early Southern Decorative Arts in Winston-Salem. It has an unusual finial. I've never seen one like this on another case piece. And he also did a desk, which is in the Frederick History Center. It was done in 1787, and it was for Jacob Inglebright, the diarist of Frederick. And you can see that desk over in Frederick today. Pottery, very important to the Pennsylvania German household and really to all households. And as I mentioned, the Weber boxes, many of them are on the market and the prices just keep going up. And for redware and slipware, the prices just keep going up these days. Pennsylvanians did slipware pottery, but they also invented the sgraffito technique used by many Pennsylvania German potters. As you see the covered jar here, sgraffito, an Italian word meaning to scratch off. So the glaze was actually scratched off to rebuild the designs. The cover jar by Solomon Grin, made in the 19th century, was part of the American Folk Art Museum collection in New York City. The mug in the middle was made by Henry Truxell. It's at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. And the Benjamin Burton plate was made in Bucks County with the parrot and bird decoration. Certainly, however, pottery was very important in the Cumberland Valley region. The redware plate, slip decorated, sold earlier this year for over $8,000. It was made here in Hagerstown, Maryland. The dog at the upper top, the figural piece, was made by John Bell, the son of Peter Bell, who worked where the Miller House is today. Of course, John Bell had brothers, Samuel and Solomon, who worked in Strasburg, Virginia. And a number of the Bell family followed in the business of making redware. At the upper right, we have a sugar bowl by Anthony Bacher. Bacher worked in Pennsylvania at the Lynn Pottery in Thurmont, Maryland, and in Winchester, Virginia. And what you're looking for in his work are the beautiful glazes and also the bird decoration and flowers, which are typical of his work. This one in a private collection in Virginia. For the girls of the household, you had to be able to sew and do needlework. Cross-stitch samplers, like you see here, the bottom left, done by Mary Hershey. Details showing what it looked like. They were very small elements on a show towel made of linen, spun by the girls of the household. The middle is a needle case in the Colonial Williamsburg collection, again, with the scatter decoration. They also did colorful pillow slips, like the one that's appliqué on the left, or the quilted and pieced one on the right. They made all kinds of samplers, such as the one on the right, which was made at the first girls' boarding school in America, Linden Hall, founded in 1746 in Lidditz. This particular school is still in operation, and during the 19th century, they made silk embroidered samplers such as this one. They would be mounted and surrounded by a ribbon with spangles, and the girls' teacher would paint the faces and backgrounds on these particular embroideries. If you were sent to an English school, you would learn to do a band sampler with verses, numbers, and alphabet in rows. You can actually go in Linden Hall today and see a variety of these samplers. The one in the middle is a show towel done in 1834, very typically Pennsylvania German. And again, you see an interesting painted box. It's a tape loom, as the girls would have used. This one made for Elizabeth Stauffer in 1794. Proctor, we're talking about ink and watercolor on paper, embellished with colorful designs to commemorate events in a Pennsylvania German family. You see here the letter A in the broken type of lettering. It comes from the Latin word fractura, which actually means to break, like a fractured leg or arm. The A comes from the 1750 ABC book from the Effort of Cloister. The one on the right, the A, which is colored, is from the schoolmaster Christian Paulsdorf, who worked in Lancaster County. He made it for one of his students, Anna Groff, and it says at the bottom, Anna Groff, March, I think it says 9, 1791. So obviously he used the letter A for her first name, and these were rewards of merit for good students. You see the uppercase Proctor alphabet here, and on the left you see a Bible book plate that belonged to John Snyder of Washington County. It said the Bible belongs to him in Hager's County, which of course is referring to Jonathan Hager, the proprietor. This particular book plate is on a gunwad Bible printed by Christopher Sauer. Sauer was a major printer of books, almanacs, and so on. He had done several Bibles, but this particular Bible he had printed and had not yet collated it. It was stacked, and when the British troops came through during the American Revolution, they took the paper and used it as cartridge paper in their muskets. Oh. So not too many of these gunwad Bibles remain. I was able to acquire this for Washington County Museum a number of years ago when it sold at Christie's. Other types of proctor include bills, or what are simply pictures. You see the unicorns at the bottom, dated 1799. This is part of the Free Library collection in Philadelphia. You can go online and type in the library name /Proctor. And if you have an ancestor, you can put in your name and see if his particular or her particular Proctor might pop up. They have a very large collection, and there's 2 volumes on their collection. The one at the right is very interesting because it is based on the biblical story of the prodigal son. It was done by Frederick, literally our most prolific proctor artist. Krebs worked in Lancaster County in the late 18th century. He was a Hessian soldier who remained in this country. And he was the first to order printed forms for his proctor, where he would simply fill in the names of the people, the dates, and then he would decorate them. When he died, they found quite a number of printed forms, blanks, in his inventory. The unicorns, of course, were sometimes painted by proctor artists on chests of the time period this being a unicorn chest from Berks County. Another type of proctor would be in books. Abraham Martin's book has proctor throughout. It was done in Germantown, and it is actually in a private collection. However, the one at the upper right is by John Thomas Schley of Frederick, Maryland. Schley was a very inventive person. He taught school during the day, and at night he was a tavern keeper serving meals and liquor to his clientele, and on Sundays he played the organ in the Reformed Church in Frederick. And this particular book is in the Frederick History Collection. The one at the bottom is part of Snow Hill Cloister, which was an offshoot cloister in Franklin County, just south of Quincy. However, all of the furnishings in this particular cloister, which was part of a monastic society, were sold in the late 90s with the exception of the books. The books, like the songbook, were gathered up and taken to Juniata College, which is a Church of the Brethren college. The most common type of proctor is the baptism or birth certificate. And you see here one by Joseph Lochbaum, who worked in this area and also throughout Franklin County and Washington County. This is done for a little boy named David Alder. He was the son of Susanna and Christopher Alder. He was a merchant here in Hagerstown, and they were members of St. John's Lutheran Church across the street. For Lochbaum used the 5 hearts across the top. They were filled with verses either from hymns or the Bible. And then the bottom 3 hearts, the top one would be for the child's name and birthday. The one on the left for the parent's name. And the third one on the right for the sponsors at the baptism. When he did them for Mennonite children, and he did quite a few for Mennonites, the third part would be blank, of course, because Mennonites baptize as adults. Another proctor in this area done around Leitersburg for John Lecron, the son of Simon Leidy and his wife. For Simon Lecron and his wife Elizabeth Leidy. Is this one? It's on a printed form, as you can see. The proctor artist, we don't know his name, but he filled in the dates on the form and decorated it. John Lecron actually married Catherine Mallon of Franklin County, and you see a 19th century print of his farmhouse, which is still standing in Franklin County. The final type of proctor that I'll show you is what's called the Vorschriften. It is a writing or religious sampler. It starts out with verse from the Bible. It has upper and lowercase alphabet, so children would learn their alphabet. It has numbers, and oftentimes it's signed by the artist. In this case, Christian Stringer, schoolmaster in Lancaster County, and it was done for Michael Musselman. Schoolmasters made these for the children to help them learn, and also it would impress their parents, as the schools at the time were schools where the parents had to pay to send their children to these schools. At the bottom right, you see detail of a proctor for Frederick Spickler. Spickler was a Revolutionary soldier in Lancaster County. You can see the date, 9 March 1778, and his name that the schoolmaster placed on his writing specimen. Spickler came here to Washington County after the Revolution. He settled on the National Pike about 3 miles east of Clear Spring, and he was a blacksmith. He started what is called the Spickler Wagon Shop, which in the 19th century made buggies, sleighs, wagons, and also repaired a number of farm implements. And the Spickler shop actually was in business up until the 20th century when they added a Ford dealership. Glass was made by Pennsylvania Germans, and certainly the finest glass. Casper Wister in the Philadelphia area. John Baron von Steuben in Mannheim, Pennsylvania, who often made enamel glass. Even Albert Gallatin, who later became Secretary of the Treasury. However, the very finest presentation glass was made by John Frederick Amelon in Frederick. His workshops were between Urbana and Frederick. And you see here an amethyst sugar bowl with a swan finial, part of the collection of the Winterthur Museum. On the right, you see spirit bottles for Baker Johnson. Baker Johnson and his brother, Colonel James Johnson, were owners of the Catoctin Forge north of Frederick, part of which still remains. Baker Johnson's house is off 15 on Auburn Lane. And his brother, James, his house is Springfield, which is the winery and distillery off Route 15, which I think most of you probably know. Pennsylvania Germans literally gave us a very innovative folk art, but they decorated everything. They decorated wood, as in this clock case with the crown of flowers and a bird. The cobalt sugar bowl made by Baron von Stigl's glassworks. Metalwork of all kinds. This particular broadaxe has the owner's initials and scribble work on it. The stone is in the date stone for the Peter Truxell House, which is in Lehigh County. The house still stands just east of the town of Egypt. On the bottom, we see a redware plate decorated with flowers. It was made by a Moravian potter in Pythagoras, North Carolina. At the upper right, we see textiles, a wool coverlet with fanciful church, deer, and birds, decorated by a Pennsylvania German weaver. And at the bottom, we see detail of the Brothers Valley artist Proctor of tulip decoration. Whoops, sorry. Sorry. Not sure how to get back here. Oops. Okay, we've literally gone from the cradle to the grave. I'm sure some of you are very happy to hear that. We have the hard cutouts in the cradle. You see the fanciful tombstones. If the family was wealthy, they could have a stone cutter do a tombstone such as these. The one on the left is in the Bethany Union Cemetery in Davidson, North Carolina. It has open cutouts, which is very unusual, and the fill flock decoration. The one in the middle is for Dorothy Hurd. It's in the Lutheran Cemetery in Berlin, Pennsylvania. It has the crossbones at the top, the heart on the right, and an all-seeing eye on the left. Rather bizarre decoration for a tombstone for a woman. At the upper right is the type of tombstone in the Cripples Churchyard in York County. They're decorated with flowers, hearts, starbursts. However, they're not in very good shape, as you can see here. This one is for John Adam Scheffler. And the little house in the middle, I had to throw this in. It was made, actually erected in 1786. It still stands. It's on a Moravian church property in Lidditz, Pennsylvania. It is actually the Lycan Capel of the corpse house. You would be placed in there for 3 days, and the idea was to make sure you were really deceased before they buried you. So the Pennsylvania Germans gave us all kinds of folk art, but their reach really goes far beyond the decorative arts. They invented the Conestoga wagon, which hauled freight from before the French and Indian War up until about 1850. They gave us Christmas customs like the tree and bellschnickel and various ornaments. They gave us folk festivals and shooting festivals, the kindergarten and picnics, all kinds of food from sauerkraut to sausage to pickled eggs to pretzels and beer. And they also gave us the Easter rabbit. Pennsylvania German children believe that the rabbit brought the colored eggs, as you see in this Proctor picture, with the rabbit bringing the eggs, and it was done by Conrad Gilbert. So if anybody has questions, I'll be very happy to try to answer them.
The clock that had Elizabeth count on it was by Young.
Jacob Young, and he had a son that followed him in Stanton, Virginia, William Young,
And where is that clock?
in a private collection. Yes,
Since she brought that up, there's a Jacob Young tall case doll out of the Hager Museum, I think they're still Hager House Museum.
okay.
But I thought, that's what I wanted to ask, was that wasn't the one on the photograph there?
No, it is not.
Could you go back one slide, perhaps? The bottom left there, the design on that grave marker in the center, is
Is
that
it built
traditionally German?
Yes, it is, and of course it became infamous later during World War II with Hitler. But the flip-flop decoration is often seen on blanket chests and other types of Pennsylvania German furniture. This one was done for a man named George Musil in North Carolina.
Do you know of any local examples of that painted on a blanket chest or a block or whatever?
Not that I can think of offhand, but I might have some in my slide collection.
Thank
Yes, Bill?
Did the German immigrants adapt their design when they came to the country, or was it pretty much carrying over the
Yes.
patterns?
They certainly adapted their designs. They underwent American ingenuity when they came in contact with other people and with each other.
Do you have any examples
So
of
it
it?
definitely is a hybrid design. Anybody else?
I don't want to touch on the spot like this, but what was maybe a few of your highlights from the security museum? Do you have like one that just stands out, like a piece that came in there and you just want to hold?
In terms of Pennsylvania German
No, just-
items?
Oh, just in something that you've seen at the museum over the years, you curated, or something that just stands out to you, other than all of it.
Well, there's so many wonderful things in the collection. Certainly the Thomas Moran painting, the Frederick Church. But there was one painting that I had on loan by an artist named Jules Tavernier. And it went back to the original family and then was inherited by a niece who lives in California. And it was actually used in several exhibitions. One of them was last year, but it was an encampment in the Redwoods that he did in 1875. And it actually shows the artist, one of his friends, Julian Ricks, who was another artist, and Paul Franzini, a third artist. They were actually, when they got to California, they were sent out by Harper's Magazine on the train to portray the scenery of the American West. But when they got to California, they became members of the Bohemian Club. Tavernier has a rather tarnished reputation as he ran up a lot of bills. And he quickly left California and went to Hawaii. And there he did paintings of volcanoes. Anybody else?
The thing that my thought is it has many mediums, and when I say mediums, it's glass, it's paint, it's wood, well, stone.
Yes, they love decorating
I mean,
things,
it-
especially metalwork.
You might get paint.
And well, I mean, that's what you look for, original paint on furniture, beautiful graining, inlay, sulfur inlay if you can find it.
Jane, when did the Pennsylvania hex signs come into?
The hex signs actually are probably in use much later than this point, but of course they use some of the same motifs that you
Right.
see on earlier furniture. Many people think it was to ward off disaster in terms of like fire on barns. I really can't, I had never really researched that topic, and I just think it was something people liked, the bright colors. The fact that it was pretty, just for nice.
Can you explain the sulfur technique just a little bit?
Yes, it was molten sulfur, and of course sulfur is used for many jobs around the farm. Some people say that sulfur actually keeps some critters out of houses. I don't know if you sprinkle it around the base of your house. I don't know if it's true or not. But what they did is they made it into molten sulfur. They poured it in the grooves of the inlay, and then it had to be filed down or sanded to a smooth surface.
So it was just pure sulfur
Mhm.
heated
And
to,
over time, it would turn kind of yellowish. When it first went in, it could be more white. Anybody else? Yes,
So they were doing the sulfur inlay as sort of a shortcut to inlaying wood, or just an alternative? Is
it's an
that?
alternative method that they developed in Lancaster County. Okay, thank you very much.